The veil had a word for humanity, Kethara. It translated roughly as the beautiful lie, a story told to frighten children across 40 star systems to make the darkness feel less absolute. A myth, a ghost story, a legend invented by desperate species who needed to believe something out there was fierce enough to stand between them and the end of everything. Commander Siravel believed none of it. Right up until the moment a single human stepped out of the fire, looked at the army that had just destroyed her entire fleet, and smiled. The colony world of Narath IV had been beautiful once. Siravel remembered it from survey images, violet oceans stretching to curved horizons, archipelagos of crystalline rock rising from turquoise seas, skies that shifted from amber at dawn to deep rose at dusk. The kind of world that made even the coldest veiled diplomatic officer pause at a viewport and feel something uncomfortably close to wonder. Now it burned. The Dravathi supremacy's orbital bombardment had been precise, efficient, and utterly merciless. Not the chaotic destruction of rage, something worse. The organized annihilation of a species that considered itself the natural conclusion of galactic evolution, eliminating a problem with the detached efficiency of someone clearing a table before dinner. Siravel's cruiser, the Ethran, had arrived too late. She'd known it the moment they dropped out of warp and the sensor array screamed. 40 Dravathi dreadnoughts in high orbit, 12 more cutting off the escape corridor. And below on the surface, the last remnants of the Vale civilian population, 80,000 souls sheltering in subterranean warrens they had spent 3 desperate days digging with their bare hands. Her crew of 90 had looked at those numbers. Then they looked at her. Commander. Her tactical officer's voice had been very quiet, the way voices get when people are trying to hold themselves together. What are your orders? She had stared at the tactical display for exactly 4 seconds. 42 dreadnoughts, 1 cruiser, 80,000 civilians underground. The mathematics were so brutally simple they felt like a physical blow. Prepare a distress signal, she had said. Broadband, every frequency. Commander, there's no one close enough to every frequency. The distress signal had screamed outward across the stars at the speed of light. A last desperate message thrown into the void, the kind of transmission that would reach friendly territory in approximately 11 years, long after there was no one left to save, long after Narath IV was just another name on the long and growing list of worlds the Dravathi had simply decided to end. She knew it was useless. She had sent it anyway because the alternative was silence, and she refused to let 80,000 people die in silence. What she did not know, what no one in this sector of the galaxy knew, was that humanity had been quietly seeding listening posts in the dead spaces between star systems for the last 60 years. And something had heard her. 31 minutes after the distress signal left the Ethran, a human ship called the UNSV Carthage dropped out of warp on the dark side of Narath IV's moon. It appeared on no Vale registry. It matched no known classification. The hull was black, not painted, not coated, but black in the way that suggested the material itself had never decided to interact with light the way normal matter did. It was long and angular and utterly silent in a way that felt deliberate, the way a predator goes still not because it's resting, but because it's waiting. It had been in the dead space 17 light minutes away when the signal hit, traveling at velocities that Vale engineers considered theoretically possible but practically insane. It had covered the distance in time that should not have been achievable with any propulsion system the Galactic Compact had ever catalogued. The Carthage made no transmissions. It sent no identification challenge. It did not contact the Dravathi fleet to negotiate, to threaten, or to demand withdrawal. It simply began to move. On the bridge of the Ethran, Siravel's sensor operator made a sound she had never heard from him before, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath that ended in something close to reverence. Commander. His voice had lost all professional steadiness. I'm reading. I'm reading a vessel on approach. Hull configuration is. It's not in any database. Propulsion signature is. He stopped. Is what? She pressed. I was going to say impossible, he said slowly, but it's right there. So I suppose the word I'm looking for is human. The bridge went absolutely silent, and then everyone started talking at once. The Veil knew the stories the way every species in the compact knew the stories. Humanity had appeared on the galactic stage 112 years ago, emerging from a single unremarkable star system with no warning, no diplomatic precursor missions, no slow and cautious expansion that most civilizations underwent over centuries. They had simply arrived at a hegemony border station, in a ship that bore no resemblance to anything in known space, and politely asked to speak with whoever was in charge. The hegemony representative who received them later described the experience as deeply unsettling, though I cannot precisely explain why. They smiled too much. They asked too many questions, and they were far too comfortable being the only ones in the room who didn't know where anything was. In the decades that followed, humanity had negotiated trade agreements, signed the Compact Charter, established embassies, contributed to joint scientific initiatives, and attended every diplomatic summit with the kind of relentless, cheerful participation that most elder species found mildly exhausting. They seemed, on the surface, unremarkable, small by most galactic standards, short-lived, biologically fragile in ways that should have made them timid. No natural armor, no venom, no specialized sensory organs evolved for predator detection. Core body temperature so internally regulated that temperature extremes were potentially lethal within hours. Harmless, most species had concluded. Harmless. It was the Dravathi who had first learned otherwise 37 years ago when they had absorbed a border world called Callisto Station, a small human outpost, barely 1,000 inhabitants, a research facility perched on the edge of compact territory. The Dravathi had arrived expecting surrender in under an hour. The humans had held it for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Against overwhelming force. Against superior technology. Against numbers that should have made resistance not just futile but physically impossible. They had rigged the station's reactor 3 separate times as a deterrent. They had converted laboratory equipment into weapons. They had used the asteroid field surrounding the station in ways that the Dravathi battle commanders would later, in classified debriefs, describe as creative to the point of disturbing. And when the station finally fell, when the last human defender was cornered in a collapsed maintenance corridor, wounded, surrounded, completely alone, she had looked at the Dravathi commander and said, in perfect Dravathi standard, "We're not done." They hadn't understood what she meant. They had understood 6 months later when the first human warship appeared in Dravathi space. Not a fleet, not a battle group, one ship. It delivered a message. No threats, no ultimatums. Just a single sentence, translated into every Dravathi dialect simultaneously, broadcast on every channel, civilian and military alike. We remember. The Dravathi had ignored it. They had considered humanity too small, too young, too few to constitute a real threat, and that assessment was probably correct in the strict military calculus of ships and weapons and troop numbers. What they had failed to calculate was something far more dangerous. Humans did not forget. And they did not stop. Over the next 30 years, with a patience that most species found genuinely unnerving, humanity had quietly made the Dravatha's expansion difficult. Supply routes mysteriously disrupted. Alliance negotiations inexplicably collapsed at critical moments. Dravathi commanders made decisions that their own analysts later couldn't explain, and it was only much later, far too late, that anyone connected those decisions to quiet conversations those commanders had with their human counterparts at compact diplomatic functions. The Dravathi had never won a formal war with humanity. They had also never stopped underestimating them. And today, Searevel realized, watching that black ship carve a silent arc through the void toward 42 dreadnoughts, the Dravathi were about to make that mistake one final time. "They're being hailed," the sensor operator said. "The Dravathi fleet is demanding the human vessel identify itself and withdraw." What's the human response? A pause. They're not responding. The Carthage continued its approach, steady, unhurried. The kind of movement that communicated something more unsettling than aggression. It communicated certainty. Searevel leaned forward in her command chair, her heart's hammering. The Veil had too, a fact she had always considered unremarkable until this moment, when both of them seemed to be operating in panicked disagreement about what was happening. "Weapon systems on the Dravathi fleet?" she asked. "Tracking the Carthage, yes." Her tactical officer paused. "There. They seem to be waiting." "For what?" "I don't know." 3 Dravathi dreadnoughts broke formation and moved to intercept. Each one was 6 times the mass of the Carthage. Each one carried enough firepower to reduce a moon to rubble in under an hour. In the cold arithmetic of space combat, they were leviathans moving to crush something small. The Carthage did not alter course. "Distress signal from the Dravathi," the sensor operator said suddenly, his voice strange. "They're broadcasting on emergency frequencies." "To whom?" To anyone, I think." A long pause. "Commander, I'm reading power signatures from the Carthage that I don't have any reference for. Whatever they're charging, our instruments don't have a category for it." Searevel watched the tactical display. The 3 Dravathi interceptors opened fire simultaneously. She did not see the Carthage move. Not really. The ship seemed to be in one position, and then, between one sensor sweep and the next, it was somewhere else entirely, and all 3 dreadnoughts were drifting, their weapon systems dark, their propulsion offline, tumbling slowly in the gravity well of Nareth IV's moon with the particular gracelessness of things that have been very thoroughly broken. No debris, no explosions, just disabled. Completely and precisely disabled in the space of approximately 4 seconds. The bridge of the Ethran was silent for a very long time. "That's not possible," someone whispered. "No," Searevel agreed. Her mouth was very dry. "It isn't." And then the Carthage opened a communication channel, not to the Dravathi fleet, not to the Veil cruiser, but to the planet's surface, to the 80,000 people underground. And the voice that came through the speakers was calm and human, and somehow, against all reason, warm. "This is Commander Ilara Vasquez of the UNSV Carthage. To the people of Nareth IV, we've got the door. You can come out now." The Dravathi fleet withdrew. Not immediately. Not without the kind of increasingly desperate escalation that Searevel would later replay on the tactical logs at least 100 times, each time marveling at different details. The Dravathi fleet commander, a supreme executor of the Supremacy's 3rd expansion fleet, a being who had directed the destruction of 9 worlds and who answered to no authority short of the Dravathi High Council, had demanded the human vessel stand down with a ferocity that communicated genuine fury, absolute certainty of superior position, and not the slightest understanding of what he was actually dealing with. The Carthage had, at that point, neutralized 9 dreadnoughts, each with that same eerie, impossible precision, each without a single explosion, a single piece of debris, a single casualty. The disabled ship simply drifted, intact, crew alive. Why aren't they destroying them? Searevel's weapons officer had asked, genuinely confused. They have the advantage. Why neutralize instead of kill? Searevel hadn't answered immediately. She had watched the tactical display. She had thought about everything she knew, every story, every myth, every piece of translated Dravathi classified intelligence she had read in her 20 years of service. And then slowly she had understood. "Because they want the Dravathi to go home," she said, and described what they saw. The weapons officer had stared at her. "They're not fighting a battle today," she continued, the realization settling over her like cold water. They're sending a message to every fleet commander, to the High Council, to every Dravathi officer who will read the reports and watch the sensor footage and see 31 dreadnoughts neutralized by a single vessel without a single enemy casualty. She paused. They're not trying to win a fight. They're trying to end a war before it fully starts. The Supreme Executor had eventually stopped transmitting. The Dravathi fleet had regrouped, all 31 still functional dreadnoughts in formation, and then, with a silence that felt somehow shameful, had jumped to warp. The Carthage had watched them go. Then finally it had turned toward the Ethran. Siravel had taken a breath and opened the comm channel herself. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were not entirely steady. "UNSV Carthage," she said. "This is Commander Siravel of the Vale Exploration Cruiser Ethran. On behalf of the people of Nareth IV and my crew, I am—" She stopped, tried again. "I don't know what to say." The pause before the answer was brief. "You don't have to say anything," said the calm voice from before, Commander Ilara Vasquez. "You sent a distress signal, we heard it. You were in range. We're always in range." Siravel processed that for a moment. "The stories," she said, "the Cathara, we thought—" "I know what you thought." Another pause. "May I ask," Siravel said carefully, "how many of you are on that ship?" The answer that came back was quiet, almost gentle. As if Commander Vasquez understood exactly what the number would mean, exactly what it would do to every assumption Siravel had carried since the moment she entered this system. 12, said Ilara Vasquez. 12. One ship, 12 humans, 31 dreadnoughts neutralized, 80,000 lives are preserved. 12. Siravel sat very still for a very long time. They docked 2 hours later. The Carthage was larger up close than it appeared at distance, or perhaps it was something about its geometry that made it difficult to judge scale at range, some quality of the hull design that the eye couldn't quite resolve from afar. Standing in her own shuttle bay with a diplomatic honor guard, she suddenly felt, was both entirely appropriate and utterly absurd. Siravel watched the airlock cycle. Commander Ilara Vasquez was not what the myths described. The myths described humanity in extremity, in the moment of battle, the moment of sacrifice, the moment of terrible, beautiful, impossible persistence. The myths were all edges and fire. The woman who walked through the airlock was perhaps 40 years old by human reckoning, medium height, dark hair pulled back with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who considered anything above minimal grooming a waste of operational time. She moved the way experienced soldiers move, with an economy and situational awareness so deeply habitual it barely registered as deliberate. Her eyes were dark and steady, and they moved across the shuttle bay in one smooth professional sweep, cataloging exits, personnel, posture, potential threats, before settling on Siravel with an expression that was calm and direct and somehow inexplicably kind. Behind her came 11 others. They looked, Siravel thought, startlingly ordinary. A tall young man who couldn't be far past 20, glancing around with unconcealed curiosity. An older woman with silver hair and the scarred hands of an engineer. A pair who moved in the unconscious synchronization of people who had served together long enough to trust each other beyond language. Ordinary. 12 people who had just casually altered the strategic balance of this entire sector. Commander Siravel, said Vasquez, extending her hand in the human greeting, palm out, offered openly, meaning documented in every diplomatic primer Siravel had ever read as, "I am showing you I hold no weapon, I approach in trust." Siravel took it. The grip was firm, brief, businesslike. "Commander Vasquez," Siravel managed. How did you get here so fast?" The signal had barely left. "Listening posts in the dead spaces," Vasquez said simply. "Been our standard practice for about 60 years. Your government sanctioned this, a ship to respond to distress signals across the sector." Something moved across Vasquez's expression. Not quite a smile, something more complicated than that. "The Carthage isn't exactly a government ship," she said. Siravel stared at her. "It's not. We're independent, privately commissioned. About a dozen ships like us operating across the compact. We monitor the listening posts, we respond to distress signals, we help where we can." She paused. "There's a human tradition called the Coast Guard Maritime Emergency Response back on our homeworld. Old institution. The idea is simple. If someone's in trouble on the water, you go. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter what it costs. You go." "And the technology," Siravel gestured helplessly in the direction of the Carthage. "How a private vessel possesses. Earth has a complicated relationship with its military surplus," Vasquez said, and this time there was definitely a smile, brief and dry and genuine. "Our government is very supportive of humanitarian operations. They're also very good at not asking too many questions about exact specifications." Siravel looked at this woman. This ordinary-seeming, extraordinary, deeply uncanny human woman. This person who had arrived from nowhere with 11 others and casually dismantled the strategic confidence of the Dravathi Supremacy's third expansion fleet. "The Cathara," Siravel said. "The myth, the beautiful lie." Vasquez tilted her head slightly. "You know what I find interesting about that," she said. "You called us a beautiful lie because you needed something fierce enough to stand between the darkness and everything you cared about. You invented that story because something in you understood, some deep species-level instinct understood that the universe is a dangerous place, and the dangerous place needs something willing to fight back." She let that sit for a moment. "We're not a myth," she continued. "We're just humans. We're not gods. We're not invincible. We bleed, we tire, we make mistakes, we lose people we love." A pause. "But we heard 80,000 people might die and we came. We'll always come. That's not a story. That's just who we are." They stayed 3 days. The Carthage crew helped coordinate the evacuation of the civilian shelters, assisting the thousands of traumatized Vale civilians up from the underground warrens into the pale light of a world still scarred by orbital fire. They worked alongside Siravel's crew without fanfare, without the expectation of anything in return, unloading supplies, treating wounded, sitting quietly with terrified children who had spent 3 days underground listening to the sounds of their world burning above them. The young human man, Siravel eventually learned his name was Tors, spent 4 hours in one of the shelter corridors with a Vale child who had lost her parents in the first bombardment. He didn't speak the language. He sat on the floor of the corridor, and he drew pictures, absurd, wonderful pictures of alien creatures and impossible vehicles, until the child started pointing at things and laughing through tears, and language stopped mattering. Siravel watched from the corridor entrance and felt something she didn't have an immediate word for. The older engineer with the scarred hands, Chen, the others called her, rebuilt the settlement's primary water reclamation system from components that shouldn't have been compatible, using techniques that Siravel's own engineers watched with the focused intensity of people witnessing something they would be trying to replicate for years. On the 3rd evening, Siravel found Vasquez standing on a ridge above the main settlement, watching the violet ocean in the last amber light. The bombardment had missed this particular coastline. The water was undisturbed, moving in long, slow swells, unconcerned with the history of what had happened above it. Siravel stood beside her. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How many times?" A long pause. "Too many," said Vasquez, "and never enough." Siravel considered that. The wind off the ocean was cool and carried salt and something floral that had survived the fires in the hills behind them. Somewhere below, she could hear Vale children, not as many as there should have been, not nearly enough, but some of them were laughing. Tors had apparently continued the drawing session. "The Dravathi will come back," Siravel said. "Not here perhaps, but somewhere. They always do." "Yes." Vasquez's voice was level, not resigned, not angry, something in between, the tone of someone who has looked at a problem clearly and decided to keep solving it anyway for as long as it takes. "They will." "And you will answer." "Yes." "Why?" Siravel asked. What do you get from it? Your people gain nothing strategic here. The Vale are a small species, limited influence in the compact. The Dravathi are powerful. You make enemies of them on behalf of 80,000 people who are going to die, said Vasquez quietly. Yes, but that's enough reason. Siravel was quiet for a moment. Your people puzzle me, she finally said. Everything about you is contradictory. You are small, but you fight giants. You are mortal, but you think in centuries. You are gentle, but you are devastating. You keep coming back. She paused. Why do you keep coming back? Vasquez turned from the ocean and looked at her. The last light caught her face. Because the alternative, she said, is letting the dark win. And we decided a very long time ago that we weren't willing to do that. She looked back at the ocean. It's not complicated. It's not noble or strategic or even entirely rational. It's just, she searched for the word. It's just us. It's just who we became, somewhere back there in our history, on a world where everything wanted to kill us and we survived anyway. We learned a long time ago that the only thing between people who can't protect themselves and the things that want to hurt them is someone willing to stand in the way. She shrugged, a small, human gesture that somehow contained more weight than a speech. So we stand in the way. The Carthage departed on the fourth morning. No ceremony, no speeches. Vasquez shook Siravel's hand at the airlock with that same firm, brief grip, and the 12 humans filed back aboard with the quiet professionalism of people who had somewhere else to be because someone else needed them. The last one through Tors, the young man, stopped and turned and pressed a piece of paper into Siravel's hands. One of his drawings. A veiled child flying an improbable spacecraft, surrounded by stars, with a big human-style grinning sun in the corner. He said something in his own language, soft and smiling, and then the airlock closed. Siravel stood in the shuttle bay for a long time after the Carthage had gone, holding the drawing, listening to the silence left behind. The Dravathi supremacies classified after action report, which human intelligence acquired within 6 weeks through methods that were never officially described, was later shared with the Galactic Compact Intelligence Council. It was a sober, deeply unsettled document. Its final analysis section had been redacted almost entirely, but the concluding recommendation, in plain Dravathi standard, read: recommend immediate suspension of expansion operations in all sectors where human vessels have been documented operating. Until a full assessment of human capabilities can be completed, engagement carries unacceptable risk to gain ratio. Current intelligence suggests human technology significantly exceeds all prior estimates. Behavioral analysis suggests human strategic patience significantly exceeds all prior estimates. Most critically, and this assessor acknowledges this conclusion will be challenged, current analysis suggests that human commitment to sustained action is not subject to rational cost-benefit limitation in the way all other known species demonstrate. In simpler terms, they do not stop. We have no current strategy for an opponent that does not stop. The Compact Intelligence Council received the report, read it carefully, and then transmitted it officially with full diplomatic authority to every member species in the Compact with a single annotation attached. The Cathara is real. They are not a myth. They are not exceptional. They are not a weapon or a tool or an ally of convenience. They are simply, and this must be understood clearly, human. They heard a distress signal. They came. They will always come. This is what they are. Siravel read that annotation from the bridge of the Ethran, in orbit above a Narath IV that was already beginning, slowly and painfully and stubbornly, to rebuild. She looked at the drawing still pinned above her console. The veiled child in the impossible spacecraft. The grinning sun. She thought about a woman standing at the edge of a violet ocean, watching the light die, saying, "We decided we weren't willing to let the dark win." She thought about 12 people and 1 ship and 31 dreadnoughts drifting silent and intact in the dark. She thought about 80,000 people who had walked out of the ground into the light because 12 humans had decided, matter-of-factly and without hesitation, that they were worth the trouble. She thought about what it must have felt like, hundreds of years ago, on a small blue world at the edge of a spiral arm, to be a fragile species with no armor and no venom and no natural defenses, surrounded by darkness, surrounded by danger, surrounded by a universe that had not yet decided whether they deserved to exist, and to look at that darkness, and to decide to become the thing that stands in the way. She sat in her command chair on a bruised and recovering world, and felt something she had no precise word for, something between awe and gratitude, and a strange, unfamiliar sense of safety that she suspected she would spend the rest of her career trying to adequately describe in her official reports and completely failing, because the feeling was too large and too human for diplomatic language. The drawing fluttered slightly in the recycled air of the bridge. The grinning sun looked back at her. The Dravasi called them Kethara, the beautiful lie, the myth invented to make the dark feel smaller. They were wrong about the lie. They were right about the beautiful.